have you spent a lot of time in like the third world? Have you, like, I actually, when I was 6 or 7, I lived in the Dominican Republic, which is next door to Haiti. I'm sort of wondering how, like, why you think that this model has not been more widely applied in the third world, given the fact that these policies can turn Haiti into Norway.
Well, I don't think that your lived experience of being there is actually very relevant. I think what's relevant is the trivially available public data that you yourself just recited a minute ago, right? The nth intervention in Haiti that like Jean-Bertrand Aristide, when he ran for president of Haiti, his original campaign slogan, swear I'm not making this up, was that he wanted to raise the Haitian people from misery to poverty, right? This is a very unambitious reform program, right? This is the most minimal effort at some kind of lefty reform program you could get, but you try that shit in America's Monroe Doctrine backyard, and you end up getting stuff like Aristide being literally kidnapped and taken out of the country by U.S. Marines in 2004. You broaden your view beyond Haiti, and you start looking at the rest of the Western Hemisphere south of the United States. You see, for example, you want to talk about attempts to implement something like a Nordic model. You see Salvador Allende in Chile being a democratic socialist, get a president, being killed and removed in a coup that's very openly supported by the United States. You see that in Guatemala in '54. You see that versions of that in Haiti numerous times. This is not ancient Cold War history. I mentioned Haiti in 2004. We could also talk about Venezuela in 2002, unsuccessful attempt. We could also talk about Honduras in 2009.
Can we actually?
I think so. I think that there is a pattern that emerges here. And I understand you don't want to see it, but like this is a really clear pattern.
The pattern is one that I'm sort of very familiar with from my experiences with Nate Reeder. My dad was a Foreign Service officer and worked in the State Department for many years. His first post was the Dominican Republic, which was the site of one of these interventions. I think it's very possible to take that view when you look at a sort of very high and blurry level at these things. When you sort of descend a little bit deeper into, for example, the Nelson Rockefeller era of, he was the coordinator of Inter-American Affairs, which means he was basically the sort of proconsul for Latin America. You'll see, for example, let's take, for example, the example of Allende versus Pinochet in Chile. What you'll see if you do what's called a prosopography, which is an analysis of social network connections, is that Allende is, I would say, much, much more of an American figure than Pinochet. Pinochet is a very Chilean figure. Even in Argentina, he would have been weird. Allende is a globalist. He's a member of basically the global Americanized elite. One time I had, in the early 2000s, before I acquired some of my political direction, I had a boss who was Brazilian. He was actually Brazilian Chinese. And one day he came to me and he's like, what's really strange is that, like, my wife is a documentary filmmaker, and so she's kind of part of this world, and she's like very Americanized, and she hates America. And my brother-in-law runs a video store, and he loves George W. Bush. And how does this come about? And I'm like, it's very simple. The most Americanized people in the world are the most anti-American. And you'll find this pattern. You'll find this pattern among kind of Latin American elites everywhere. And so, from my perspective, the State Department in its Latin American policies is actually very much guided by a sort of mix between kind of the orthodox school of Latin American studies kind of program that we've been hearing from you and reality. And so if you take, for example, the case of Aristide in Haiti, the idea of a $5 a day minimum wage in the country where the average wage is probably 75 cents a day would go very, very far toward ruining what is left of the Haitian economy. And when you look at Aristide in particular, there's a lot that reminds us of, for example, our good friend Comandante Chavez, and that Chavez managed to take Venezuela. Chavez managed to escape all of this alleged CIA ExxonMobil plotting and actually run his own country in Latin America, and with great advice from the more radical wing of the School of Latin American Studies and the Sandinistas, if you know the term, and all those kinds of people. And the result was that he basically took the country in Latin America with the most resources and turned it into this incredible pit. And so, the idea of doing that same kind of maneuver in a country without oil would have been, sort of extremely remarkable. And you can bet your socks that among the people in the State Department who sort of countenanced the withdrawal of Aristide, that there was not a Republican among them. There are no Republicans in the State Department, zero. Like, if they exist, they spend their time deep in the closet. Moreover, and I'd be happy to point you to a link that basically, far from being, you simply don't notice all of the times that, from this perspective, that America has gone out and evangelized the, quote, non-communist left. All of the, Kennedy going down to Latin America in the 60s and supporting APRA, Alliance for Progress in Peru, and saying things like the only alternative to violent revolution is peaceful revolution. You're going to get a revolution whether you like it or not, guys. And, the sheer amount, this goes on with Wilson's intervention in Veracruz in Mexico, where Wilson basically, you have this Porfirio Diaz, who, basically anything that works in Mexico was either created by colonialism or by what were called the científicos of Diaz. Diaz retires, and he's like, okay, I want this guy, was it Maduro? Basically this other thug to replace me. And America is like, oh no, we must not have thugs. And so, you basically get this kind of classic Wilson-Debs split between American candidates in Mexico, where the Wilsonites support Cardenas and the real hotheads, the John Reed types, support Pancho Villa. Your heroes would definitely be on the Villa side. And the result is this incredible Mexican Civil War that kills like 2 or 3 million people and reduces the country to a state of anarchy that it has not yet escaped from. And so, when I compare, the America's guilt in promoting leftism in Latin America, which, by the way, goes all the way back to the original Monroe Doctrine, because the original Monroe Doctrine was a policy inspired by England. It was really an English policy that was treating us as a satellite state. And the goal of that policy was to assure commercial dominance for English merchants, capitalists, in Latin America. This is why soccer is such a big thing in Buenos Aires. And it worked very well at that. And the policy was basically no monarchs, no European monarchs in Latin America. Mm-hmm. And then the Brazilians tried to have their own monarchy, which was actually kind of freaking cool, being Emperor of Brazil and all of that. And then the policy was, of course, you had the affair of Maximilian in Mexico, which was only possible due to the Civil War. As soon as the Civil War is over, the Americans are like, hey, Louis Napoleon, like, didn't you read the paper? Like, we have a huge army here, and we're ready to invade Mexico if you don't get rid of this empire. So Mexico had to go back to, like, broken third world government. And so, the sort of influence of basically imposing leftist systems on what was originally the peaceful and happy empire of New Spain is, for me, basically the sort of cause of all these troubles.
Yeah, so most of that's wrong. Porfirio Diaz did not retire. He was overthrown after fixing an election to get himself reelected. He was overthrown. He died in Europe still plotting his unsuccessful return to power. Cardenas, you were talking about, didn't come in until the 1930s, a couple decades.
Oh, no, you're talking about a different Cardenas.
Okay. I don't think so, but people can look
I'm
into
talking about the constitutionalist that Wilson was supporting.
Certainly, the initial legitimately elected government immediately after Porfirio Diaz was overthrown with very direct participation from the U.S. ambassador in Mexico. Another of those famous examples of America promoting leftism in Latin America, which is very much the opposite of what most of the track record is. We also heard a bunch of things that I'm not quite sure how they all fit together or how they're supposed to be relevant to the original point. The original point being that even very mildly reformist left governments in Latin America are very hard to keep going in the face of American state opposition. Now, we heard that people in the State Department are Democrats instead of Republicans. I don't know why that distinction would be relevant to anything. Of course, this stuff is bipartisan. LBJ, look at what he did in the Dominican Republic, for example. I've never had the slightest doubt about American empire being a bipartisan project. We heard that no, social democratic policies would have been a disaster there. So I guess it's good that they couldn't be implemented in these various cases. None of this is particularly relevant to the original point, which is that if you look at economic models, what you have in a place like Haiti is the polar opposite of something like the Nordic countries with their strong labor unions, strong regulatory state, extremely expansive welfare state, and the latter works a whole lot better than the former in delivering those basic goods of a more reasonable, less authoritarian criminal justice system married to a low crime rate.
And you really think that nobody has ever had the idea of using the Norwegian system of government in Haiti? Like you're convinced of that?
When on earth did I say that? Did I just say that and black out? I never. In fact, what I said is almost literally the opposite of that, Curtis. What I said is that attempts at doing things that fall way short of that were not allowed to happen.
If we go back to the Haitian Revolution, my God, certainly that was allowed to happen. That was some pretty. You should read Lothrop Stoddard's The French Revolution in San Domingo. It's a really amazing work. And this reminds me of the sort of the story of
the Haitian Revolution was allowed to happen. The story and they were forced to pay reparations to France up until the 20th century. So if you want to know something about the economic origins of the distinction between Haiti and Norway, that might be a place to start.
Right, because they were paying off their relatively small national debt. It's true, they don't have oil there. They do have sugar, though. They had
to pay reparations to their former slave owners for the loss of property in the slave revolution. That's what happened.
And the genocide and the but yeah,
the number of people that we're talking about there
is small. It's
tiny.
Now,
Stalin, in comparison to what you mentioned,
Stalin,
I really enjoyed when you mentioned George W. Bush earlier, because if you want an executive who's not going to let himself be pushed around by Congress, who's going to get stuff done, like detaining American citizens without trial, like starting a worldwide torture regime, like starting a drone war, that's your dude. You have been watching free public content from Give Them an Argument. To access every single episode of the show, the main show on Monday nights, all of the streams, all of the debate breakdowns, all of the patron-exclusive postgames on Monday nights, all of the patron-exclusive bonus episodes every week, and much, much more, go to patreon.com/Ben Burgis. I cannot resist ending this with, don't be foolish.